And that's kind of the amazing thing with color. And that's why so many people, like, you look at a painting and it just makes you feel a certain way, no matter what the content of the painting is, but the colors, the palette, how warm, how cool, you immediately have a visceral reaction, which is something that color has the ability to do. And sometimes even yourself, I'm sure you do something and you're like, that color just doesn't feel right. It might be logical, but it just doesn't feel right. And something else feels better. I love in this scene that you have that sun in the background, because I think that's such a great point that it sets the stage. To me, it feels like it's probably sunrise. I don't know. For some reason, I feel like Western fights are usually like meet you at sunrise, 6 a.m. or whatever. So
Mhm.
that was what my mind went to, that it was the sun coming up and sort of, that sort of feeling. But it really does set an emotion to that first panel, that the sun is there in the background in the street and it's empty other than them.
Yeah. What's kind of interesting though too is that um, certain things that people think are um, certain like yellows, for example, if you were to um, take like a sun and desaturate the color, like what you would paint the sun to be, it would be very dark, right?
Hmm.
Even though when you look at you maybe paint the color itself may look bright, that it stands out.
Yeah,
You desaturate it, you go, whoa, that's real. That's like 70% dark. You would
yeah,
realize, or like the sky can be much darker than we realize when you
absolutely.
desaturate things, right? So it's really cool how color, we have the way that our brain processes color isn't always accurate
No, and it's
to the
not the
way.
same as everybody's, right? Like, I've had many conversations with someone where I've been like, "Ooh, that gray thing," and they're like, "It's green." I'm like, "Well, it's more gray. It's a gray green, but I see it as gray and they see it as green, just
Mhm.
because our brains pick up different aspects, and also the monitor you're looking at it on." Right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes if your monitor calibration or your TV or whatever you're looking at it, the colors can appear very different um, on different screens, which can make it really hard to judge something, because you might be like, this is way too yellow, but it's like, okay, look at it somewhere else. Is it still too yellow, or was it just too yellow on that particular monitor you looked at it?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's that. Yeah. So there's the aspect of people's perception of color, which is there is what was it, the dress that some people saw as like gray, blue, or
Yeah,
gold,
it
and
was black and blue or it was white and gold, and everybody saw it differently.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that. Yes, for sure. There's that kind of. But there's also things where um, it's the brain, like when you start to look for color, when you start to actually see value,
Mhm.
you see things, you train your eye to see the let's say, for example, the way that the snow, the sky bounces the light off the snow, and also
Mhm.
kind of seeing tinges of blue in the snow. But if you were to ask somebody what color it would be, like, oh, it's white. But I would describe what I was seeing because of the, not like what the natural, or like that base color is. I would
Yeah.
describe it as how I was actually seeing it in reality. And so, I see it a little bit differently than other people do, because I've trained my eye to see that kind of nuance, whereas somebody wouldn't necessarily know that, and they would describe it as the thing that they know, that the sky is this color, that the snow is this color, right? Versus what it may actually be in reality, right? So there's that aspect too. And then, yeah, what you were saying in regards to like sometimes, like my wife and I had this big thing. I wouldn't say a disagreement, but it was kind of like there was a car that somebody was driving, and I'm like, oh, that's like but I think it was like a yellowish green, and she's like, no, it's more greeny yellow, and I'm like, and we
Exactly.
debated over it for a while. Like it was just, she saw it as, she was looking at it a little bit more, like she was like, oh, no, I'm seeing green more. And I'm like, really? I see more
Yeah.
yellow. And yeah, so it's
Well, and
funny.
that's like cars are a great example actually, because they have so many different kind of tints and tones and the way that they get the light. Like even my car, like I look at it and I see it more on the gold side, but other people would describe it more as silver because it kind of is, depending on how you look at it and which light, it picks up different colors. And it's really interesting to just see everyone's first reaction to a color isn't necessarily the same. It's also one of those things too, where, we've talked about reference for motion and movement and stuff like that. But I feel like color is another thing that sometimes needs reference because your mind's eye can lie to you, right? So like you said about snow being white, and then if you looked at some rep, you'd be like, oh, you know what? There is other colors in it. My brain just wants to think it's white or that
Mhm.
the sun is yellow or whatever it is. But when you actually look, that's just, a reference and a memory versus the actual colors that are there because we've all kind of all been trained that certain things are certain colors.
Yeah. Well, that's right. That's um, why there are ways for you to train your eye.
Hmm.
If you squint your eye, if you go like this, and everything kind of like blurs a bit, and color becomes a little bit more like the edges of everything fade, and then all of a sudden, um, you're not necessarily seeing the color as much as you're seeing the values. So that's a
Yes.
great way for you. That's always that was what I learned when I was learning to, when you're painting traditionally, to go is, like what I'm painting, am I looking at the values properly? Because you could, as I said, if you don't see that there's like more of a darkness to the behind the bowl of fruit, that
Hmm.
may make that like that value may be a bit darker. But if you're not like squinting your eyes to really see that, you may not paint that. And all of a sudden, what's happening is now the bowl feels like it's connected to the back, and
Yes.
now you're like you can't tell what's in front, what's in the back. It just all blends together, right? So it's really important to learn those things if you want to, uh, learn to get color properly in a way that's going to make your whatever you're doing a little bit more evocative of whatever you're trying to get across. You're essentially you're controlling your audience, and ultimately that's what you're trying to do with the whole painting or the whole
Hmm.
illustration is you're manipulating their eye to look at certain things in a certain order. And if you are like if there's things that confuse the person's eye, then they're not going to know where their eye should go. And then they're all of a sudden, the story that you intend to tell them isn't the story that they're receiving. They're looking at it very differently. Right. And so, certain things are important for you to kind of figure out, like, like you need to know, um, like how your eye's supposed to go in a story. But there's certain things maybe that aren't as important, like your point of going, well, I see it as a sunrise, and maybe I'm like, oh, it's a sunset. Well, it in this story, I don't think it really matters too much.
No.
So you can see it however you want, and I don't know. Ultimately, I don't know if I would change things um
Hmm.
that much. And I think, yeah, like I do think that if it's a sunrise, then those lights may be a little bit more, the shadows, I should say, a bit more stark, potentially. But again, this is all just for fun. So
Yeah, 100%. And I think that exactly what you said is, you're showing people how to look at your art via how you're coloring it too, right? So if suddenly that building in the back was super bright, had lights on, like, was drawing your attention and it shouldn't be, then that's not ideal because it's just kind of background texture. But if suddenly it's, fluorescent orange and it's the first thing you look at and you seem like this is what the focus is, that's not helping your audience to understand what they're supposed to be taking away from this. So it's important to not just choose colors because they're fun or bright or you like them, but that they're going to actually help guide your reader, whoever, through it in a way that's going to help them make sense of what you want them to make sense of.
yeah, well, that's one of those things where I'm a little bit always a little bit concerned when somebody else is coloring my work, because it
Hmm.
my sensibility, I have a very, like, as you can see here, I have a very specific kind of sensibility when it comes to color. And sometimes I don't know if the person that's coloring my work has the same sensibilities. And so, it's important for me. First of all, I have to let go because it's part of the collaborative process. But secondly, I also have to make sure that, like I know what I intend to do if I were to color it.
Mhm.
And that means that I have to make sure, well, let's put it this way. If I'm coloring something, I may leave certain details out in the line version because I know that, I kind of have an idea of where the light's going to be going. And I know like what the colors are. I have an idea of what I want the colors to be. But then if somebody else is doing the coloring on your work, you have to really make sure you give them every indication of what it is that they need to know,
Absolutely.
like where the light and shadow are coming from. And, like there's a lot of, obviously a lot of leeway that they're going to have in regards to deciding what, if there's like, a pattern of color, like transition of like, like in the dragon where there may be like, different modeled colors throughout
Yeah.
and that's going to be different from artist to artist, just depending on how they decide that they want to interpret the creature, or the character. But yeah, like if this is a sunrise, see, actually that's a really good example. If I didn't distinguish in my line
Mhm.
art that this was a sunrise, the person who is coloring may think it's a sunset, and that's different color. That's purples and right. So there's going to be some different color schemes happening. It's the twilight of the night, so the shadows are maybe a bit more purple, like there could be different, ways of approaching it so that the person knows that the sun is going to be setting. And so because of that, they may completely change the timing of the whole story. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden you're like, oh, well, no, it's supposed to happen in the early day because there's all these things that happen after.
Yeah.
And then at
No, it's
night is
perfect. Yeah.
when the story ends. But if you're starting, in the sun setting evening part, that makes no sense because nothing, like, so, obviously hopefully the colorists will look at it and go, oh, why is it sunny the whole time? That makes no sense. But
What happened? Yeah, it's the
yeah.
next day. Well, and that's a really great point, right? Like, is making sure that anything that is story important is indicated in a way that someone could pick it up and continue your work and get that, right? Like, and that goes for writing as well. Making sure that the editor knows these things. I purposely did it this way because it's important to the character or the story. So don't go fix the grammar in this section because that's supposed to be like that to really give you place or time, or this is how the character talks or acts, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And if they don't know that, they'd be like, oh, this is missing commas and periods and start going through. And it's like, no, that was on purpose. And
Yeah.
likewise, if it had to be a sunrise in order for the rest of the story to make sense, then it's important that they realize that from the get go. Otherwise, you end up in a place where you're like, oh, right. I should have mentioned that or been more specific because it was slightly ambiguous.
Yeah.
Um, which is when you're doing it all the way through yourself, you can take those liberties because you know in your mind and nothing needs to be explained.
Yeah, that's right. You can figure it out as you
Hmm.
go and just make sure that it's consistent all throughout the story. But yeah, like all of that information needs to be given to the person that's working with you, either before or after, at whatever point that the in the process, everybody needs to, w-
Hmm.
it's like a relay race, right? The next person needs to pick up the baton and you can't fumble it, right? You gotta firmly give it to them. And if you
Yeah.
do, that means that you're going to have a higher chance of success towards the end, right? Um,
Absolutely. And everyone that touched it's going to come through being like, amazing. Like, I see my contribution, and then it moved forward to the next and the next, and everything just added and built and improved versus, taking steps backwards, confusing things, making it less clear. If everyone's briefed properly, the documents are shared in a way that everybody can fully understand. You do get that better product at the end of the process.
yeah. Well, that's really, that's there. I mean, there's also a world where somebody who has more experience than somebody else will go, you messed up on all of the
Mm,
lighting here. And because I understand, like, I'm a colorist, but I also understand how to create like form, and I
right.
understand how lighting works on the form. And I understand like that what you're doing is contradicting, like you're putting lines where there shouldn't be. I have to go in and correct that. And so
Yeah.
now, like, cause a good, anybody, you could say that somebody who's hired to just like color, and they're not going to second guess what somebody else
Mhm.
has done. Like, to your point of like writing something where you're like, well, no, I wanted it written a certain way. I would hope that the editor would check in with you and go, did you mean to do this?
Yeah.
Right. Uh,
Yeah.
and so a colorist will, hopefully, I mean, it depends. Like, some colors may go, I don't really have time to like contact this person, wait for them to get back to me. I can tell these are mistakes. I'm going to talk to the editor to let him know that
Yeah.
I have to do this, because, it's for time. I don't have time to like go back and forth. So can you give me approval for this? Great. Awesome. So now I'm just going to go ahead and make these changes without the artist knowing being included in the process, right? Uh,
Mhm.
but who knows? Like, there could be, and that's where sometimes problems can happen. Is like somebody may have, to your point, may have been like, no, no, I did want it that way, and then
Yeah.
the colorist is changing it, and the artist is the pencil or ink or whatever is like, well, that doesn't look the way I intended it to be a certain way, and now it's not, and that sucks, but you know, I don't know. I don't know what else to do at this point. You just kind of have to, live
Yeah.
with it, right?
Well, and I think that's always the hardest part is the more hands that touch a project, the more it has the opportunity to morph and change and have new opinions, new feelings, new additions, whether they're good or bad, because some will be great. Like you said, someone might notice and be like, oh, I think this was an accident. And if they were right, good catch, and you solved the problem. If they were wrong and it was on purpose, then it's created a new problem. And that's part of the issues when you have a broader team that aren't constantly like in the same office, if they could just yell over to each other, be like, did you mean to do this? When it is that kind of, I give you feedback, I wait to hear back from you before I can continue, especially if you have time zones involved, right? Because
Yeah.
that does happen. You're not necessarily in an immediate same time as the person you're working with. And that can also, now you've lost a whole day. If you had to ask them something, wait for them to respond, you could have been done that section, but you can't move forward without that information. So there's so many, that's why it's like, oh, this shouldn't take this long at all. There's so many other factors that can creep into the process that can make something take a lot longer than anticipated for
Hmm.
no fault of your own.